and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall.
Welcome to Cinemaholics. We're back with another one-off episode because we're not doing the main ep right now because I think the main episode of Cinemaholics Will Ashton is going to have to be Matrix Resurrections, right?
Sure.
Like that's,
Yeah,
you know.
that's my fault.
So we're just going to talk about one movie.
I haven't had a chance to see Matrix yet. I apologize. It's been busy with the holidays. I haven't had a chance to see Matrix Resurrections yet. So I'll see that probably tomorrow. But in the meantime, we got another movie we can talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about it.
So. It's a movie I've been wanting to talk to you about since before I even know it existed.
Oh,
right?
man.
It's like
Wow.
there's some movies you just have in your gut, and you're like, there's something coming. There's a storm coming.
Yeah.
And a storm it's been since Licorice Pizza, the newest film from Paul Thomas Anderson,
Yeah.
was first screened and hit limited release. People have been all over the place with this movie. I think we should say from the outset, right, that
Yeah.
it's getting the accolades, it's getting the attention awards wise.
It's been a tough month for me because I kept seeing people see Licorice Pizza before me and then see it 2 times or 3 times or 4 times. And I'm like, I just want to see it once. What do I have to do to see it once?
I don't know what's going on with the Pittsburgh film scene, but I do believe that it needs to be addressed immediately because, we should have had this conversation a while back.
I would, if I could have, I would have.
Yeah. Well, here we are now. And we're talking about the latest film from Paul Thomas Anderson. How many films has this man made as a filmmaker at this point? I gotta say it's over 10, right?
Is it? Let's see. It's Hard 8.
Hard 8's his first, 1996.
Boogie Nights.
Not a big hit. Boogie Nights a huge hit. One of the biggest hits of his career.
Then Magnolia.
Magnolia in 1999, I want to say. Yeah, that is, I think, his second highest grossing film.
Oh, is it really?
I believe so.
I thought it would be a film I'll just say later down this lineup.
Okay.
Well, there's Punch Drunk Love, which wasn't a big hit.
That was 2002, right? Adam Sandler.
And then they took a little break, and he made There'll Be Blood, which I thought would be his biggest hit, or one of his biggest hits.
It is.
Yeah.
I said second biggest hit. So There'll Be Blood, 2007, his biggest hit. I think the awards, juice for that movie was the big element behind its success, even though it was a very long film.
Is it longer than his other ones?
Longer? I don't know. Longer, but I mean, it's more epic in scale, isn't it?
Sure, certainly in scale. The Master follows that one. Great film.
Yeah. But also, I mean, it does slightly better than Punch Drunk Love, which is not saying too much.
Sure. And then you got Inherent Vice.
The weakest of his career.
Well, you never finished it, so you don't have the right to say that.
I'm saying box office wise.
Oh, okay.
And you're right. I didn't finish Inherent Vice.
Very good.
Maybe
film.
someday.
His weakest in quality is probably Hard 8, which is still quite a good film, I think. But
yes, and I'm not counting that as the weakest box office wise. I mean, it technically is. It didn't even crack 1 million.
Sure.
But
yeah,
relatively speaking.
But then then there was Phantom Thread, which is one of the biggest critical and commercial hits of his career. One we discussed.
That's actually his second biggest.
Yeah.
Third biggest. Excuse me.
Really?
It's third biggest after Magnolia. So you got There'll Be Blood, his biggest, and I'm talking about domestic. I don't know actually know about worldwide. I was just looking at this because I was curious. Phantom Thread is his number 3, and I think part of the reason it's 2017, and I think it had been 3 years since one of his films had come out. Low reception, and before that we had The Master, which is one of his best, but this certainly there was excitement behind it. There was a little bit of a hey, he's got a new thing coming, and 2017 was a stacked year, so it's kind of amazing that it got as much love and attention as it did. I think a lot of it did have to do though with Daniel Day-Lewis, and people being like, hey, this is his chance to get that get that Oscar.
And then in between Inherent Vice and Phantom Thread there was Ju-on. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. There was the Johnny
Janoon, the documentary.
Yeah, that's the only one of his I haven't seen. I've heard, it's fine. I would like to see it at some point.
People don't talk about it much. It's about Johnny Greenwood, Radiohead, that kind of thing, and it's
of course,
I've heard it's worth seeking out, but it's kind of like a novelty kind of movie, not really like a, hey, drop everything. We got to get the kids out. Sure. They need a sitter.
But how many movies was that? I didn't count.
I didn't count either.
Well,
I think. All right. I think it's 9 or 10.
Yeah,
so
that sounds about right.
Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There'll Be Blood. I'm counting with my fingers. The Master, Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, Licorice Pizza, and Jenna. That's 10.
That's 10. All right. So
that's 10 movies.
This is him in the double digits now, baby.
We did it. Yeah. The 10th film by Paul Thomas Tarantino.
Sure.
I actually had a thought like that a few years ago. I was like, is Paul Thomas Anderson like the thinking man's Tarantino, or is that a terrible sentence that I just uttered?
Well, there have been quite a few comparisons to Licorice Pizza and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That's true.
Favorably or not, I think they're both very good films. Not to jump the gun on Licorice Pizza, but I don't know if I agree in terms of that assessment. I feel like that's a little
Well, okay, here, it can be a little bit reductive, but let me bring out my my argument here. Okay, so like there are some similarities, and obviously they're two very different filmmakers, right? And that's what I want to stress. But the similarities are certainly there. They both make long movies. They both have original screenplays for the most part, by and large.
They are writers and directors at the same time.
Yeah, they write and direct their own films. They are extremely deliberative about what they make and what kind of things that they choose to make. I think for both of them, their second film is considered one of their best and most celebrated, right?
Very influential films.
Exactly.
To mid to late 90s.
Boogie Nights and Pulp Fiction we're talking about.
Yes.
And yeah, I just think that they're individualistic filmmakers who take the cult of film very seriously, but they approach it in two very different ways. Whereas Tarantino is more overt in his referential approach to filmmaking, where he's like very meticulous about homage, and his dialogue is very, very sharp and crisp, and it complements like a movie that feels like dozens of other movies all blended together perfectly. I think PTA, he approaches films very differently, where I think his dialogue has never been my favorite thing about his movies. Like, they're good, but I think my favorite thing about his movies are the writing of the characters in a visual sense, their expressions, their place in the world, and all the subtext. I think the subtext of PTA is like a more thinking sort of feeling that he gets from his films, whereas Tarantino, it's a little bit more on the surface. He has subtext too, but it's definitely a different level. It's a different level of appeal for two filmmakers who I think are on the two sides, same coin, and all that. That is my Tarantino PTA take.
Yeah, I mean, no, I get what you're saying. I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson, to your credit, is, I guess, less precious with his screenplays, especially these days. In terms of like, he kind of like follows the characters more. He like kind of follows his own dialogue and kind of quirks and individual aesthetic choices and all that. And I guess I feel like Tarantino can kind of like if you were to tell him like, hey, we're gonna cut this scene, he's like, not in your life. And like with PTA, be like, hey, what if we just kind of did this and said like, yeah, why not? We'll try it, and then it just ends up being great.
He's like, I would watch that. You know, that's kind of his approach.
Right.
Okay. Well, I guess we could turn it to Licorice Pizza, since we've set it up pretty thoroughly here, right? Now I have to start by saying it's been a month since I saw this, over a month. Wow. So I was telling you, Will, before we started up here, I was like, I'm not going to have as vivid a memory of this film, but I will admit that it has stuck out. It has lasted in my head. I know you're still processing it, though, so we're coming at it from different wavelengths. Now, the film's getting a lot of awards attention, as we already mentioned. It was nominated for Best Picture with the Critics' Choice Awards. I think it's very, very likely going to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Probably a few different nominations on top of that, including, I think, Original Screenplay, Director,
some of
the biggies there.
Do you think he'll win Original Screenplay this year?
It's very possible. I'm still looking at a lot of other screenplays that are really sticking out, but yeah, that one's looking strong, especially because the adapted screenplays are kind of where the real competition's at when you're looking at like Power of the Dog. Yeah. But for this one, I think this has a really good shot. And I know people are looking at Alana Haim, who, she could come in here, probably not win Best Actress, but certainly be in the conversation. So, that's where this film is at right now with critics and audiences. Critics, by and large, are absolutely loving this film.
Yes.
I think audiences, I don't want to spoil anything because we're going to play the Rotten Tomatoes game later, but I think that there's like, I'm mostly seeing positivity for this thing, at least on my timeline.
There's discourse. We can say that.
Of course.
There is a lot of chatter about the film and how it approaches the characters. It's a subset. Yeah, sure. Right?
Not everybody. It's like not half even. It's probably like a third or a fourth of people being like, no, this thing's a monstrous abomination.
I think some people said some hyperbolic things that maybe they should just spend less time on Twitter. How about that?
And it's very related to Red Rocket, which I'm also excited to talk to you about at some point. My favorite film of 2021.
I also I heard Hand of God also kind of taps into some similar things, but I have not seen Hand of God or Red Rocket yet.
Yeah, and what we mean is like we're talking about a movie where characters are very morally flawed, doing morally flawed things, and sort of the conversation is that okay? Is it okay to depict that? Even if depiction is not endorsement, is it still, glamorization to an extent? And what is that really doing to the collective psyche when you have a film that has, problematic stuff in it? I think it's something that we haven't really fully reckoned with as like a film body. But I do know that most people who are going to watch Licorice Pizza aren't going to be thinking about that. They're going to be kind of like, yeah. I think mainly because it's a movie that takes place in the 70s, early 70s, I want to say. And it takes place in Los Angeles. It's, you mentioned, you connected it, of course, to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This takes place a few years after that film does. But yeah, very much in the same spirit of that movie. Like really just looking at LA and being like, man, you should have been here in this era. Like this was the time to live in LA. It was such a magical place, weird and imperfect as it was.
Truly, what a time to be alive.
Right. And the name of the film, Licorice Pizza, I didn't know this when I was watching and reviewing and everything, but it has been brought to my attention that Licorice Pizza was a record chain, right? And like an album, a record was called like a Licorice Pizza. I was like, oh, okay. Like I just changed that. I had no idea.
Yeah, like the logo is like a waitress like holding a vinyl record like a pizza. Like there's like steam coming out of it. I think that's a logo for Licorice Pizza. Yeah.
I believe the record chain, it doesn't exist anymore, but I can see why it's like kind of, helpful in summing up this movie. It's something that, kind of takes you back to a different time, and it's kind of quirky in that regard. The story of this movie follows two kids who just don't know what to do about each other. We start the film with a kid named Gary Valentine, great name, played by Cooper Hoffman, who I didn't know this because I didn't watch the trailer or anything. I didn't know really who was in this. And I had no idea that this was Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. But as I was watching it, I did not know. But as I was watching it, I was like, this guy, is he the son? I swear that I had that thought. I was like, is he related to Philip Seymour Hoffman? Sure enough, he is credited as Cooper Hoffman at the end of the film. And I'm like, oh, like that must be who he is.
Did the hands on hip acting give it away for you?
There were a lot of mannerisms like you can really pick up on, and he's different though. He's not a clone of his dad. He really is his own actor, but like, it's there, like the similarities, the resemblance.
No, I mean, I agree. It's like, he's kind of forging his own path. I mean, this is his first film. It's kind of hard to, I don't want to say too much too early, but he seems, like you say, he has kind of individual touches, but there are some moments where you'll see him do certain things in a very, I think, undeliberately Philip Seymour Hoffman sort of way. And it kind of gives you like a little bit of goosebumps because it's just like, oh, geez, like kind of similar to like Michael Gandolfini in Many Saints of Newark. Like he'll just kind of like turn his head a certain way, or he'll do something that's very reminiscent of his dad. And you're just so used to seeing it with their dads that when they do, it's just like, oh, geez, like, wow.
I mean, that's why I'm eager to revisit Many Saints of Newark, at least to some extent, now that I've watched The Sopranos, and I can actually add some of that, familiarity in for myself. But yeah, so Cooper Hoffman plays this kid, Gary. He's 15 years old. He is a former child actor. Like he's kind of in that transition period where he was a kid actor. He was successful on this kind of like variation of Yours, Mine, and Ours. And he's kind of aging out of that. And this movie is so brilliant, by the way, in how it depicts that process of when a child actor stops, getting the roles,
Yeah.
And he's at an interesting point in his life where he's kind of transitioning into a more entrepreneurial career. And when this film begins, he locks eyes on this young woman. She's 25 years old. Although someone was arguing with me that she isn't really 25 in this movie, which
They
okay,
say she's 25. Are they implying that she's lying?
Yeah, which I was like, I feel like that's just you're trying to just put that in there.
Yeah,
I don't know. The movie doesn't give you a reason to question her age, really, right?
Right. Yeah, she's like always very critical of it. Like the reason, like she's like, I shouldn't be hanging out with this kid because he's like, half my age. So
well, not half, but
sorry, I'm exaggerating a little bit, a little less than half. Yeah,
it's a 10-year age gap,
right?
Which to be clear, like that kind of gap doesn't matter. Once you hit your 20s and 30s, but in that range, when you're 15 and somebody's 25, that is a significant gap there.
When you're talking about a teenager,
right?
Yeah,
he locks eyes on her. He's immediately attracted to her. She's kind of like this, this like young photographer's assistant. She's kind of aimless in LA. We know that story. We've seen La La Land. But he is immediately infatuated, but she's having none of it. She's like, you're just a kid. But yeah, as you kind of mentioned, they build kind of like a friendship. It's platonic, but obviously like he wants more, and she's kind of like, I can't act on this because it's disgusting. But there nevertheless is this like bond between them. And the movie is like basically a hangout movie where these two people go on misadventures, and we have tons of fun friends coming in along the way, including Sean Penn, Tom Waits, Bradley Cooper. I mean, it's a spoil of riches in terms of the character actors who get to come in here and have some fun hamming it up in this movie. And I love this movie. It's one of my favorites of the year. It's fantastic. I mean, it's just like one of those movies that like makes you remember like why watching movies is emotionally fulfilling and why we do this in the first place. And I think all the praise and love and enamoration it's getting is more than warranted. But Will, you just saw it. So yes. What is your, this is my thoughts after a month, and I firmly stand by my thoughts on the movie. What about you?
Oh, I love this movie. It shouldn't come as much as a surprise because, Paul Thomas Anderson, as I've mentioned before on this podcast and elsewhere, is my favorite filmmaker, or at least my favorite working filmmaker. So, I mean, I just tend to expect I'm going to like his films. It would be more surprising and certainly more disappointing if I didn't like the film. And thankfully, that's not the case.
The Master is your favorite, right?
Of his?
Yes. I feel like I've heard you say that. Is that right?
No. Master is one of my favorites. It's probably my top 3. I really go back and forth.
Punch Drunk Love, isn't it?
Probably Punch Drunk Love. I really do like Punch Drunk Love a lot. And the thing I was going to say about Paul Thomas Anderson movies is that, like, I feel like I don't get a full idea of them until I rewatch them a few more times. Like, he's very good about being rewarding with his films. Like, you can't fully... I feel like I don't have a full understanding of how I feel about his films, besides just general baseline feelings, until I see him a couple times. Like, they envelope themselves in very interesting and meaningful ways to me as you rewatch them, and that's something I really value a lot about his films. And I imagine that'll certainly be the case with Licorice Pizza, but with this first viewing, like you mentioned, it's like very much about the vibes. It's very much like a hangout movie. We were discussing before we recorded that there are a lot of people who are like, well, what's the plot? Including my dad, like, well, like, what's the plot of the movie? And I feel like if you're going into this movie being like, what's the story here? I mean, there is a story. There's a lot of story. But if you go into it like, what's the general plot? You're going to be, I guess, a little aloof because this is very much a character-driven film. Paul Thomas Anderson's been influenced by a lot of filmmakers throughout his filmography, certainly Scorsese, Jonathan Demme, Robert Downey Sr., who gets a tribute here at the end of the film, and Robert Altman are some of his biggest influences. I feel like this is probably surpasses Magnolia as his most Altman-esque film, in that, like, even though it has like all these characters and has all these things going on, there's a very kind of casual, shaggy quality to it that feels very lived in, very like emotionally honest, but there is something about that's almost like hazy and dreamlike. Like, it kind of feels like you're in this like netherworld at the same time. Like, you're in a world that feels real but also feels like it's like intangible, and that's something about Paul Thomas Anderson's movies that really just fascinates me, and the more I watch them. And I feel like this is one of the better examples of that, in that, like, it feels like kind of like you're walking into this nostalgic memory, but at the same time there is this clear-eyed reflection where, like, you get both perspectives from Gary, where he is, nostalgic and young and doesn't really see the world exactly for what it is, but he also sees it as a hustle. Like he sees all these different ways he can take, the world by storm, and he doesn't really want to be tied down to any one thing. Then you have Alana, who is still young, but she's approaching, like her late 20s, and she still hasn't really figured out what she wants to do with her life, and she's trying to cling to her childhood in some respects. And the yin and yang of their relationship just forms this really, really meaningful and poignant film, and I just really love it for many, many reasons.
I think this film captures one of PTA's deepest strengths as a filmmaker. The thing that really sets him apart, and I guess I kind of touched on this earlier with the Tarantino thing, but this is a filmmaker who he is so good at capturing and literalizing the abstract. He can take an abstract feeling or mood or sense of being and use literal events and metaphors to really make that metaphor come to life in like a way that's just like it works on like multiple levels. Like that is, I think, his gift as a filmmaker. He did it super well with Phantom Thread, a film that I think just went over people's heads. Unfortunately, some people, I remember some of the initial reaction to Phantom Thread was like, that wasn't a very good PTA movie, just like a decent movie. Where I think that film was doing a lot. There was a lot going on there, but like you said, I think people realize this stuff after they've kind of revisited his films a few times,
or even just think about it a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Maybe read some stuff on it, get an impression of other people's perspectives on the film. I know with this one, he's doing that for sure with like some real life, inspirations and stories. He had this friend growing up, he said, named Gary Goetzman, that of course the main character is based on, who's a producer with like a lot of Tom Hanks films. And like literally was like getting up to these same hijinks. Like this isn't a whole cloth, inspired thing. Like literally started a waterbed company, a pinball arcade. In fact, I didn't even realize this, but like the whole thing that happens with John Peters is based on a real story where he actually delivered a waterbed to John Peters' house. Yeah, that's a real thing. And I think it's striking too that there are two films that Anderson has remarked on as being like, all right, these are the two films that influenced me the most. And one of them is, I think, pretty obvious, and that's Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You watch this movie, if you're a fan of Fast Times, you've seen it at least once, like the inspiration is there, particularly with like some of the kids and like, some of the little moments like that. But then also his second influence I thought was pretty fascinating was American Graffiti, which not a film I immediately thought of, but yes, like absolutely, like you can really tell that film's DNA is like all over this, but in a way that, like I said, it's not like Tarantino where he's doing it literally. He's capturing like the moods of these films in his homage. It's what kind of just, I don't know, it's like what sets him apart in a very interesting way for me, which is a big reason why I feel like this film is going to be like infinitely rewatchable.
Yeah, I mean, there's even sort of a like Linklater vibe to this one too, which I don't know if that was deliberate, but it does kind of feel similar to like Dazed and Confused, and I guess more recently Everybody Wants Some, where there is like this kind of like as you mentioned, like this hangout feel where it does like there's not a lot of like dramatic urgency to it, but there is kind of like this sense of like there is forward momentum, like there is this idea of like something is encroaching, whether it's like this kind of budding partnership, or if there's like this kind of like inevitability of like Gary becoming older, and like there's this very interesting idea of like masculinity in this movie is sort of portrayed in like this kind of almost like rigid, disastrous sort of way where like all the guys around Gary Valentine are like self-destructive, toxic, like hyper masculine people, and he's portrayed certainly a little bit more
he's softer,
vulnerable. He's a little bit more sensitive, more in tune to his feelings, but he is kind of there's a lot of posing obviously because he's like 17 or like I guess 15 and he's like trying to like be a man. He's like trying to the script never forgets he's 15. It's never portrayed as like, oh, you'd think that he's in his 20s. It's a surprise that he's 15. No, like you can tell. Right. And I think, I mean, that's something that I feel is maybe getting lost in translation with the conversation around the film, is this idea that like the film isn't aware of their age. Like the idea that like they are young or he's young and she's like obviously older. I feel like people are like, I don't know, just like it's everything about this movie it feels very conscious and deliberate, but at the same time, P.T. Anderson feels so willing to try different things. Like there's this spontaneity to it that comes about that I find that so impressive that he's able to be so deliberate and so like spontaneous at the same time. I just really don't know how he pulls off that balance.
Yeah, there's been a lot of hand wringing for sure about the film and how it handles like that age gap, right? And like kind of like as we were saying, is like is it making light of that sort of thing? You know, is it downplaying it? I only have two real issues with the film. And one of them I think is like just indefensible. There are like some like
the Japanese jokes.
Yeah, John Michael Higgins' character, and I'm just like, not funny. It's kind of like, come on, like low-hanging fruit. It's not, you know, I kind of get what he's going for, but it's not successful. Right. It's distracting. Like, take it out of the movie. Like, it's not worth it.
Right.
You agree.
Yeah, because it doesn't really add a whole lot to like the overarching story. And I get like the joke is supposed to be more that like Chad Michael Higgins is aloof and stuff, but it's kind of hard to like. John Michael Higgins.
He is a Chad, though. Yeah, you're right. He is a Chad.
Sure. But like there is that sense of like, is PTA expecting us to laugh for the right reasons? If
I think that's the thing. It's like it's easy to read that scene as being like, oh, he's making fun of the guy making fun of. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Obviously, he's a big doofus.
Right.
But that's why I say it's not worth it. It's just like it's not a good joke. Like okay, like you can accomplish that very easily with a funny, you know, joke. So that's my whole take on it.
And you see people like, I mean, I don't know how many people were in your audience, but when I was watching and there were people laughing, it's like, okay, are they laughing for the right reasons? Like, it's hard to say when you were like watching it because, you know.
Yeah, I didn't have that same experience, but I could have easily imagined that being very uncomfortable for people. Like, oh gosh, am I, you know what I mean? The other thing that I have an issue with is how I do think the film ends, and I think like where it kind of lands on certain things. Now, we don't have to get into that now, since I'm sure people are, you know, a lot of people probably listening who haven't, you know, seen the movies. We're not going to give anything away, but I did talk about this in my review because I did a review back when the film, when I first screened it. And I talked about it. I talked about how, you know, I tried to explain like why I love this movie, even though it depicts, you know, certainly not like it's not a relationship that is explicit or, you know, it, as I mentioned, it's platonic, but obviously there's a yearning there, right? And it's about two people who know that they can't be together, and yet they're still drawn together in a different way. And it's a movie that kind of like pulls you in like that. That's kind of like the hook of the movie. It's what keeps you invested. It's what makes the audience care. It's what makes them be like, I want to know what happens next because I'm curious about like the stakes for these kids and like how they see each other. And I also think that it's a film about, you know, how their different places in life relate to one another and the similarities and the contrast behind that. I think is extremely fascinating. So I wrote that, or I did that in my like review, and people were kind of like, you know, really up in arms about it. People were just like, calling me out. So I wrote this, and I don't think I don't think you've you're aware of what I said here. I want to get your reaction here. This is I wrote this in the comments of the other review I did. I said I want to address some extra things here that have been raised in the comments, so anyone else who scrolls past can get a clearer picture of where I stand on the noisy controversy around this film. I'd have liked to talk more about this during the actual review, but it's tough fitting everything in. Plus, I'm definitely still chewing on this movie. Again, this was November 19th, so it was a while back. It's a lot to process. First off, there is a big difference between a movie being about something immoral and a movie being immoral. In other words, a movie can have bad things in it and bad people doing those bad things, but that doesn't necessarily mean these bad things are being presented as ethical or moral. See almost any crime drama. I criticize plenty of movies that I consider immoral, as in they're endorsing the bad things being presented, or at best fetishizing awful behavior for the sake of shortcutting entertainment at the expense of insight. Licorice Pizza is not a 2.5-hour movie about pedophilia, and I'm saying that in direct response that is like the criticism I'm being told, is that this is a 2.5-hour movie about pedophilia. It is not. I think that's a pretty unfair characterization, because it really is about a young, overconfident teen boy trying desperately to grow up faster because he's convinced himself that happiness is wrapped up in the freedom of adulthood. He's a reverse Peter Pan, but with the personality of Peter Pan. This is why he spends a lot of the movie pursuing a woman much older than him, and it's a one-sided romance, to be clear. The woman woman in question makes it clear she's not down with dating a 15-year-old, but she still gets pulled into his world for reasons that the movie unpacks quite diligently. On the one hand, she's a user, just like him. She sees Gary as her ticket to a better future in Los Angeles. Gary uses her too because he seems to think a relationship with her will validate his position as a serious actor and man. This is what the movie is really about, how two terribly flawed people can form a meaningful bond out of something toxic and selfish. I think there's a lot of healthy discussion to be had around the morality of where this movie lands, and I'm not discounting anyone who finds it troubling. My only point is that I applaud the risk and PTA's audacity to go there, even if not everyone will agree on how he pulls it off. This is very, very different from the film's handful of Asian jokes, which I did find pretty terrible. Those jokes aren't about anything. They're cheap, they're boring, they don't add anything to the movie except cringe, and therefore stand out in a film that is otherwise so far above that line. They're also not major elements of the movie, which is why I didn't dwell on them for this review. The movie is still a pretty terrific piece of work in my opinion. Blah, blah, blah. That's the gist. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really take any issue with that. Yeah, I think you quoting the Roger Ebert piece about that? Because I know Roger Ebert has a piece that's kind of similar. I mean, obviously he didn't write
that's
about,
incidental. No, that was just me.
I mean, obviously he didn't write about Licorice Pizza, but like he's talked in the past about like how you can view a film that has, you know, immoral characters and like deals with very unsavory things, but you can recontextualize it. You can look at it, you know, in multifaceted ways and not, you know, this is not a film.
I'm far from the only person who's ever said that, for sure.
Right. I know. Yeah. I just wasn't sure if because what you said was almost like very similar to what his quote was. I had to pull up the piece to be sure, because it's been a while since I've read it. But yeah, I mean, this is like I don't know, not to dogpile too much on Twitter in this episode, but I feel like this is like a very not Twitter film. Like, this is not a film you can really discuss in 240 characters. Like, I'm sorry. Like, there are almost 240 characters in the film, so it's kind of hard to discuss it in 240 characters. There you go. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's not something that should be ignored, but I think it's kind of one of those things where you have to evaluate the film as it is. Like, if you're gonna just, you know, make, you know, roundabout comments about what it is, and you're not really evaluating the film as the film, and so therefore you're not really having an honest discussion about the film. It's kind of going back like a few years ago when Call Me by Your Name came out, and there were similar conversations to be had about that film, and however people feel about that film. I feel like that, you know, it's just every film's different, obviously, but you know, these things are kind of, you have to, you know, talk about them, I think, in a very adult, critical, mature way, and that's not something that can happen on social media all the time.
Yeah, there's too much nuance to be had, and that is the enemy of social media, to be 100% certain. Yeah, I think that one thing we haven't really stressed on too much, I mean, I know we were talking about some of the jokes and everything, but I really want to emphasize this is a hilarious movie. Like, I felt like while watching this, I was in like a dreamlike state, you know, that doesn't happen too often, but you know, that sort of like spellbound, like I forgot where I was for 2 hours, right? Where I'm just sort of like being swept along this story, even though, as we mentioned, like it's not like the typical 3-act structure. It's not like, okay, here's our first act, here's the conflict that needs to be resolved at the climax. All right, here's the midpoint, here's the all is lost moment. It really is just like working off of its own like cool kid attitude, which I think is just it's just so impressive to me. And yeah, I think that it's a shame that I think it's being revered so much that there is that sort of backlash. That's sort of like, well, we need to take this thing down a peg, right? Because there are likes and retweets to be had whenever you hate on the thing that everyone else likes. And I'm sure, you know, a lot of the criticisms for the movie are coming from valid places for a lot of people. But I have sort of noticed a little bit of like an overblown, you know, all right, like I can tell like this thing is, you know, popular. You know what I mean? Even popular in like a very narrow way, like just this like subset of like film going people who have already seen it. And so that gives people like an avenue to sort of like overemphasize the flaws and kind of like have these like bad faith takes in order to get some attention. So I just wanted to point that out, that there is a lot of that going on. So if you're wary about that sort of thing, whether or not you like it or dislike it, I just think that it's an important thing to keep in mind, that people are just going to kind of say stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to hand wave anybody's criticisms of the film. Certainly a lot of them are valid. And like I said, I think you can have a pretty mature conversation about the film, even if you dislike it, and, you know, have a, you know, one-on-one and be pretty serious about it. But it does seem at the moment, you know, a lot of the instant reactions to the film are very reactionary in some of the worst ways. Like, they're just kind of making these broad somewhat baseless and very hyperbolic statements, and I feel like a lot of people are, kind of going a little overboard in what they're trying to say in terms of how they're criticizing the film without talking about anyone too specific.
We got to talk about Alana Haim, who we already mentioned is in the conversation for Best Actress, and I think rightfully so. We already talked about Cooper Hoffman, and I think he's very important to this movie, but I think the real force of nature in this movie for me is Alana Haim as Alana, and she's in this movie along with her family, literally her sisters and her parents play her actual family, and Alana Haim, who I was aware of only through as a musical artist, because this is her first film. I don't know if you're a fan of the band Haim.
I do like them. Yeah.
My only connection to Haim is I like a few of their songs, but I know when I was back when I was living in Virginia, I had a roommate who hated Haim.
Really? Why?
He could not stand. He was a musician himself, and he just hated their music. And I was like, I like it. It's fine. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I would listen to it secretly. You know what I mean?
It's going to be very basic of me to say, but my introduction to Haim was Paul Thomas Anderson because he directed several of their music videos. And so I remember watching a lot of their videos because he directed them, and I was like, I consume whatever Paul Thomas Anderson content I can get. And so I learned to appreciate the band and like them because I kept seeing their videos. And so I guess it's only fitting that I would also grow to appreciate this performance and her first, I guess, major acting role. I don't think she's done anything before this, right?
I think this is her first time in a feature-length film, yeah.
Right. And I think she's terrific. I have nothing to push back as far as your comments. I mean, I do agree that, I was really impressed with Cooper Hoffman's performance, especially given that he's never been in a film before, as either as lead or a supporting actor. But, yeah, when I think back on, there's so many performances in this movie I really do like a lot, and we'll talk about a few of the supporting actors I also really like. But Alana just, I think, really takes this movie by force, and her character. It could have been so easy for Alana, the character, to be kind of like this two-dimensional, character that's just
one-dimensional.
One-dimensional character. That is just fawned over by our lead, and I think that would have been the case for a much boring version of this film. But
she could have been nagging and just kind of oh, I don't want to, you know what I mean? But she isn't.
But she's so complex, and she not only from the screenplay but from her performance, she brings so much nuance and delicacy to this film, and I think that's why it's such a rich film, is because people can, really see her character so vividly. And Paul, is willing to dive into this character, maybe more so than Gary. I mean, ultimately, I would have to go back and watch the film to see who gets more screen time between the two of them. But yeah,
I think it's her. That would be my assumption. But yeah, it would be great to revisit for that reason.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, just a terrific introductory performance. I'm not sure if either of them are going to keep acting. I mean, I imagine they will, but I'm very excited to see where they go from here, especially if they continue acting with Paul Thomas Anderson.
I hope so. And I think that, she's absolutely killing it right now on the awards circuit. I think she's won Best Actress for a bunch of different film circles, locally, I think Atlanta, Boston, Chicago. And yeah, she was nominated for Best Actress with Critics' Choice and Golden Globes. So it's looking great for her, this could be a really great, push to her acting career starting out in earnest. I think for me, my favorite thing about her and Hoffman in this is that it's just so refreshing to see a movie where our two leads, the two main people on the marquee, are not your standard Hollywood actors, in terms of how they act and the way they look. I mean, they look like real people to me. Not that Hollywood actors like Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson. Sure. It's not that they're real people. It's not that they're not real people. It's just that that's a Hollywoodized sort of these aren't people that you would see on the street. There's this sort of authenticity to they look like people I know. They look like people I'd be friends with, and they're approachable, they're accessible. Obviously, I think that, she has an authenticity that goes beyond the looks. It's the performance too. But yeah, I just think that it's just refreshing to see. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be creepy, but I do think Alana Haim is a beautiful woman. But I mean, I get what you're saying that yeah, I mean, there's not a homely quality, but there is something a little bit more approachable to them in terms of they feel, like you said, people you can see on the streets, people you would know in your real life. And that certainly adds a lot to the lived in approachable quality of the film as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a far cry from I think, that's by Hollywood standards, right? And I still think of movies like The Duff. I'll never forget. I was like The Duff, where it's like Mai Whitman trying to make it seem like she's not a beautiful woman, and it's like a big thing that she'd be dating Robbie Amell. And like, okay, Hollywood.
I mean, I think that also adds to the 70s quality of it, because I feel like a lot of movies in the 70s, like you'd see people that look more like real people. You get a lot of character actors who are the leads and all this stuff, and I think that was a very deliberate choice, and I think one that paid off quite handsomely here.
Do we have anything else to say about Licorice Pizza before we play the Rotten Tomatoes game? Anything that's still off your chest? I
mean, I definitely want to talk about some of these supporting cameos and character actors that are in the film.
Sounds good. I didn't know how deep you wanted to get into those.
I mean, certainly I think it's fair game to talk about Bradley Cooper. He's in all the marketing and all that stuff. I don't know if he's going to be nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but I think
I think I would be quite surprised.
I
think it's too stacked a category for the Oscars. I don't know.
Supporting actor seems pretty open at the moment.
I disagree, but I think that's Cody Smith-McPhee's award to lose at the moment, and
more than Ciarán Hinds. And
I think
Belfast?
Ciarán Hinds is obviously Ciarán Hinds and Jamie Dornan are in the conversation as well. But yeah, I think that Cody Smith-McPhee is looking pretty good, just based on a lot of the predictors that are happening. But that's what I mean. It's like it's pretty stacked. Are you going to get Bradley Cooper in there?
I don't know. I'm not going to like put money on it, but I think there's a fair chance that could happen. Who knows?
I'll say fair, but yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be like, what? I would just sort of be like, really? Huh,
you don't think he's deserving of it? With this performance?
I don't think he's deserving of it. So here's my hot take with this movie.
I think he's so much fun in this movie.
He's fun, but honestly, him and Sean Penn, they're not my favorite things about this movie by a long stretch.
I thought Sean Penn was hilarious in this movie. I thought
they're funny, and like I appreciate their roles in this. I think they I like Tom Waits the most.
Sorry, Tom Waits.
I think with those two, with Cooper and Penn, it's like I'm take it or leave it with that. Like they're great additions to an already great movie for me.
Sure.
They're to me, they're not instrumental to the movie. Like they don't add anything to it for me personally. That where I'm just
I gotta disagree.
When it comes to supporting turns, like I think that to me is what defines, like even though they're supporting, even though they're not top billing, they're such an instrumental ingredient. They're so essential. I gotta disagree. I don't think they are in this case.
I mean, I imagine the reason they're in the film is kind of for like marketing reasons. Like, even though Paul Thomas Anderson is a marquee director in some respects, at least in certain circles, like we mentioned.
Yeah, they're extended cameos.
I mean, he is taking a risk and being like, here are two, I mean, obviously one is the son of one of our great and now departed actors, and another is a musician with some fame as well. We haven't really discussed the nepotism thing of it, but I don't think it's really important to in this case, at least.
I think in this case it kind of serves the story, considering it's about a person, and nepotism, I don't know, it kind of fits.
It's one of those things where it's like, I feel like nepotism is a big issue in Hollywood, but like for a film like this, it doesn't bother me as that much. Maybe that's just me being infatuated with the film, I don't know. But yeah, I think you kind of need them in the movie because you need that star power. You need enough star power to like get people in the seats, whatever, get the marketers feeling confident and spending $45 million or whatever on the film. But I feel like it's, they are standout performances, but they don't, with the exception maybe of Bradley Cooper, I feel like they don't overtake the film. Like they stand out, they make a good impression, they're fun, but they don't like overtake the movie from our two leads. Like
they don't do that. I agree.
And yeah, same with Tom Waits, and then also Benny Safdie, who I think is really good in this film as well.
I agree. I think Safdie is probably not my favorite of the supporting, but he's up there for me.
Sure. And then the performance that I really liked, I feel like a lot of people are overlooking, but I think is so crucial to the film for reasons I can't dive into without discussing spoilers, is Joseph Cross's performance, who, is only in 2 scenes in this film, but oh my God, like, is he so
He makes
good.
Him count. Yeah. It's a great.
Yeah. I feel so happy that I invested stock in him after Running with Scissors back in the day, because I think he is a very underrated actor, and I think he's doing some terrific work in this film. So those are performances I really wanted to shout. I also enjoyed all the Haim family members being in the film, and also I can never remember his full name, but Skylar. The guy, he's in Righteous Gemstones. Skylar.
Yeah, we've seen him in a bunch of Skylar. I think you pronounce it Gazondo.
Yeah. He, he's only in, probably like 10 minutes of the movie, maybe 15. But
yeah, you see him in like Santa Clarita Diet, one of his more recent things.
Oh yeah, he was in that too. Yeah, I think he was fun as well. I can't think of with the exception of the kind of flat-footed Japanese jokes. I feel like there's no like real sour note as far as like the casting or anything here.
Yeah. And also, since you brought up nepotism, we did see George DiCaprio in this movie, which is I thought pretty fun. Father of Leonardo DiCaprio, of course.
Yeah.
So competing with Don't Look Up, he was like, "All right, kid, move aside. You know, I'm in the winning hand for this one."
So wait, who did he play in this film?
He plays Mr. Jack, one of the I think he's in like if I remember right, the Sean Penn section.
Oh, that's him?
Yeah, it's George DiCaprio.
Wow. Has he not been in anything in a while? Maybe I just haven't seen him in a long time.
It's been a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look at his filmography, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
But yeah. This movie, like I said before, it's a spoil of riches when it comes to the people who show up in it. We even have Myra Rudolph,
the wife
of Paul Thomas Anderson in this. She has a really fun scene. John C. Reilly has like a second in this movie.
It warmed my heart to see them together again, even for a brief moment. You know, it's been because so many people, like me included, have been like, why aren't they working together again? Why can't they do a movie together again? And I hope that happens in more official way, but this is nice. I'm glad they're still friends, at least. I mean, that's for
sure. Yeah, there's no falling out apparently, like anything like that. It's just it's been a while since the stars have aligned for the two of them to work together.
But it's been like 20 years, I think. Like I think
something like that.
Magnolia, right?
He had a cameo, right? And There Will Be Blood, I thought. But it's just similar to this, where it's like I think so. I thought it was kind of small, but
maybe I haven't rewatched the film in a good bit, but yeah.
Was he not in Punch Drunk? It's been a while since I saw that.
If he is, it's a voice only per cameo. But I thought I'm just talking like a lead because he's so good.
Oh yeah. It's been been a long time since
he's so good in Boogie Nights and Magnolia that I just want them to work together again.
Agreed there. And I was going to also mention, there's a fun little connection with, I know we just talked about being the Ricardos on the show, but, he's in that same scene where we have Christine Ebersole playing a version of Lucille Ball, which I thought was fun because that was a nice little nod to like the TV show, because I think Lucille Ball was in Yours, Mine, and Ours, which gets referenced here. And it's like I don't know. It's like that kind of stuff that I think is like, it's really fun. Like it kind of, like I said before, it captures like the mood of this time in a really fulfilling and an interesting way. It's a time machine of a movie, so it's just great. It's just
really good stuff, man. I mean, maybe I'll walk back on the statement, but I think it's my favorite film from the past 2 years. I really like it a lot.
2 years,
yeah.
Because your favorite last year, was it
Bloody Nose, Empty
Pockets?
Yeah, I really like that movie a lot. I also really liked I'm Thinking of Ending Things, my second favorite from that year. But
great films.
This was just like, it was just so comforting to be in a movie theater and see this and be like, now I'm watching a film. Like,
the timing worked out considering that we were able to see this on the big screen, but I think it works.
Very grateful.
I mean, I didn't see Magnolia on the big screen, and that movie kicked me off my back. You know what I mean? So, all right, well, let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game, I guess. Oh, wait, what?
Is that your favorite PTA, Magnolia?
Magnolia? No.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever decided what my favorite is. I have to be honest with you. It is tough. Magnolia's that's a movie that I've only seen it 3 times, and every time I've been like, is this the best movie that's ever been made? No.
That's a weird, I mean, that is the thing about Magnolia, right? Is that like, when you think back on it, it's like, well, it's not quite as good as like There Will Be Blood and all that. And then you watch it, it's just like, gosh,
it's like,
gosh, like what a film.
Then I watch There Will Be Blood, and it's like there are different kinds of PTA films, They each have like a different kind of energy, but they are in their own little like cliques, these movies. And Phantom Thread, I guess I would put in the same world as like Master and There Will Be Blood, I guess. But this one is very much of a piece with Boogie Nights and Magnolia. I mean, really that like that sentimentality and nostalgia. And sure. That's Joaquin's time.
Sure.
But all right, let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game with Licorice Pizza. Will Ashton has to guess the Rotten Tomatoes score for Licorice Pizza. Will 188 critics have weighed in? I'm one of them. I like the film, so there's your hint. But what do you think? What do you think the Rotten Tomato critic score is for this one?
I am going to guess, and maybe this is me being a little high, but I think it's going to be 94% certified fresh.
Very close. You are 2 points off.
92?
Do you think it's higher or lower than 94?
Is it 92?
It's 92. Very well done.
Right. Certified
you
fresh?
You got a little bit of redemption. Certified fresh, of course. Yeah, I don't think you can. I think you kind of have to be if you're 92% out of almost 200. 92%. Critics are taking one look at this movie and they're falling in love. Even though they probably shouldn't. No, sorry, bit of a layup. All right. Audience score. We have 250 plus verified ratings for Licorice Pizza.
Tricky.
Audience score is always tricky. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think audiences are saying once they check this one out?
I think audiences. Well, this one's trickier too because more people are seeing it now, and they might have more divided opinions, like a general audience.
No way to tell.
I'm gonna say 76%.
76% is your guess. Very close. You're you're on your game this week. 75%.
Wow. All right. That was pretty close. Done. Yeah.
Very close. We don't usually do this, but what about the average rating on Letterboxd? There's no cinema score, so I want to kind of finish off with something. As we know, yes, Letterboxd. Yeah, we're looking at any decimal point between 0 and 5.
Is it 4.2?
How did you do that? It's 4.1. How did you do that?
Wow. I'm just going with the gut. I mean, my hands they're in my.
Can we do some lotto numbers later? Today's your day, I guess.
Yeah.
4.1 average rating, and that's out of 38,000 people have watched it, and I think that means there have been that many ratings. I've never messed with the Letterboxd ratings before, so I actually see the numbers, but that's still pretty incredible.
Yeah, people like this movie. At least a lot of people do. I mean, some people not so much, but they're entitled to their opinions.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
We'll be back later this week. We're going to be talking about other stuff. Of course, we're hoping to get to the Matrix Resurrections next if we can. We're also hoping to talk about the Tender Bar, hoping to talk about Sing 2. And what else? We got Red Rocket coming up. We got lots of films on the pipeline. And then we're going to be doing...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? You're going to say? What?
No, I'm just very excited about a lot of those films. Yeah.
I'm nervous. I feel like you're going to get into it. You're going to watch Red Rocket, my favorite film of the year, and be like...
I thought you were going to be nervous about Sing 2. That's probably going to be a contentious conversation, I imagine.
Oh, I bet. No, in all actuality, I'm quite nervous about Red Rocket. I don't want my heart to be broken. I feel like you're going to watch that movie and be like, I get to hurt John today.
Wow. I really did like Tangerine and the Florida Project, so I imagine I'll like it.
We'll see. Anything's possible. But yeah, and then I don't know if we're gonna get to Kingsman. I've seen it. Will, you haven't, and we just might not have time to get to it. I don't think it's a very remarkable film and worth prioritizing over some of the other ones we've mentioned. But
Yeah. Before we recorded,
review for it is on the site.
Yeah. Before I recorded, I was texting friend of the show Corey Woodruff, and he had just seen it. Yeah. So if you're looking for somebody to do a bonus review, he might be your man there.
Oh, well, he's covering it for the young folks. So I'm very, very happy to see what he thinks of the movie. If our takes are very different, then we got it. I'm just kidding. I would talk to him no matter what. Sure. But well, listeners, if there's anything you want us to get to that we haven't mentioned, I know we got it's that time of year, lots of stuff's flying by, and you're curious about it. Be sure to check out cinemaholics.com for sure. You might find a review on there, written or YouTube or whatever.
Did you mention Lost Daughter? I think we're covering that one as well.
I think next week, I think we'll be covering that one, Tragedy Macbeth. It's just, it's all about the timing, what we can get to. Yeah.
Very excited for Tragedy Macbeth. I know you weren't too fond of it, but that doesn't dissuade me. If anything, that encourages me. I'm like, maybe I'm going to like it more than I thought. So
I hope you do. It would be kind of tragic if both of us had negative reviews of one of the most celebrated films of the year. That'd be kind of weird.
If I don't like that movie, I'm gonna be having a bad week. I'm just gonna say that.
Okay, that's good to keep in mind because you are gonna be. You said you're seeing it on Sunday. You're gonna see it on the big screen.
I'm gonna try my darndest to see it on the big screen.
That's the way to do it for this one. Yeah,
I'm very excited.
I don't know if I would have finished it if I had seen it on like a smaller screen. I probably would have been like, nah.
It's gonna be on
things to do.
Apple TV Plus pretty soon, I think.
I think a couple of weeks from now, I want to say. Yeah,
sure.
you're doing it for sure.
Well,
but you can catch it in limited release. I think this coming New Year's is when it's going to be hitting. So
is it?
There is that. And if you are listening and you're like, okay, but what about Don't Look Up? That just hit Netflix. I want to listen. We already talked about Don't Look Up. Isn't that exciting?
You're behind the 8 ball there, if that's what you think.
As always, yeah. Be sure to check out cinemaholics.com for all the latest stuff we've been up to. There's like a nice little thing where we have like a whole thing just for the podcast. You see all the episodes, all the clips. You can just get right to it.
Got a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
a lot of reviews. I think we've gotten some good reviews, I think, of late.
I'm ready for things to quiet down. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to go. I mean, I say that, and then we're going to be hitting Sundance pretty soon, and it's going to be all over again. But what a year that this is shaping up to be. I think this is our last 2021 episode, I guess, unless we do another bonus. But yeah, so never say never.
Never say never. If that is the case, have a happy new year. To you listeners and to John.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll see you all in the next one then. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.